And that is CBT. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's been around with this title since the 60s. Some people thought that it was actually created in the 60s, but I think that the Bible is the original form of cognitive behavioral therapy. I was talking with Frank here just a minute ago, and he pointed out a verse that I was going to use here, which is in Romans. Romans tells us, Paul tells us in Romans, it says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's interesting that Paul calls us to this mind transformation. Why? Because that is how God has created us. He's created us with the ability to transform or renew our mind. And we do that through this cognitive process, all right? And it is a process that most often takes time. Healing is a process. It can happen quickly, but many times when it happens quickly, that process happens immediately. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I have intellectual information here, right? Does that change me? No. I have to go from the intellectual down into my gut, where I have a gut level feeling, and then it goes into my heart. So if you take those three different levels and how we process information, it's really when it comes into my heart that I've made the decision. When I really made a heart decision about something, then I've deposited in my life as this is the direction, as a conviction, if you will. This is the direction I'm going to go. So let me give you a simple illustration that may be helpful. Think back to when you're like 4 years old. And you're in your kitchen, you go into your kitchen, imagine this scenario, maybe it might have happened to you. And you go into the kitchen and your mom is there cooking and you're getting a little bit close to the stove. And so the stove top there is cherry red. And so mom says to you, honey, don't touch the stove. If you touch the stove, you're going to be burned. That's information, isn't it? Okay? So you take that information, even as a 4-year-old, and you process it, and you go, you know, mom usually tells me things that are true, and she's believable, and so you store that information. But as a foolish 4-year-old, is that enough? Not usually. So what happens is, sometimes, with that probably most of us, you reach up there for some reason, you touch that hot stove. Immediately, pain happens, and you get burned. Well, CBT just happened in an immediate thing. What happened was the information that you got that mom gave you now went down to your gut level feeling, went directly up in your heart. Now, I don't want to touch a hot stove anymore. Now I have a conviction. Nobody has to tell me anymore about touching a hot stove. You know, cognitive behavioral therapy, we make it sound so mystical, so psychological, so therapeutical, but really it's normal way you and I process information all the time. We do it all. It's really called maturity. You and I do it all the time. I think back to when I was 16 and I got my license. I got my license the day I was 16 years old in Oregon. I was living at the time. And my birthday, I went down and got my license. And I was mixed up with a bunch of guys that we were full of testosterone. We wanted to race our cars. Of course, it wasn't my car. It was my parents' car. And so we would go screaming down the roads. We'd go sliding around corners, and I ended up crashing my parents' car, getting tickets. It was awful, okay? So my dad, he says to me, I've started, after a couple crashes and tickets and whatnot, the insurance started to be raised. So my dad had an idea. I guess he talked to an insurance agent. Why not bring Mark in and have the insurance agent talk to him? Okay? So I went down to the State Farm Insurance or whoever it was, and the insurance agent talked to me about, the dangers of driving fast. And why don't we do this as a strategy? And why don't you take the back roads and take it slow? So what I was getting was information, right? Do you think that changed me? Absolutely not. As soon as I got out of that meeting, down the road, and guess what happened? As time went by, I crashed more cars, got more tickets. time went through, I don't know how many years I went through this process, and part of that process was pain. Every time I crashed my car, my parents made me pay for it. The pain of the pocketbook, the pain of having to pay a high amount of insurance and having to pay off tickets. Over time, finally, I decided somewhere along the line that, it might be a better idea if I just kind of slow down a little bit. And I started to, I remember the first vehicle that I got was just this old 1941 Willys Jeep. And I remember just lumbering down the road with this Willys Jeep and thinking, this really, I like this. I've got this vehicle that really can't go fast, and it forces me to be slow, and it dawned on me. And so now I even own this four-wheel, and all I do is this. I'm in the right lane, 55 miles an hour. I haven't had a ticket for a long time, knock on wood. And so somewhere along the line, this is cognitive behavioral therapy. Somewhere along the line, you see, I matured. I changed my mindset. I experientially went through the pain and consequences of my actions, and so I decided that. And so nowadays, I don't even think about driving fast. I mean, you might think about it, but the consequences are there, and that keeps me from wanting to do it. It's not part of this Mark that you're seeing here right now. It was the old Mark, but it's not part of the new Mark. That's what cognitive behavioral therapy does. Once we decide, we go through the process, you now embrace what I call the new me, the new Frank, the new Brandon. And you say, I look at these old things and I say, they've passed away. This is not part of something I want to do. It's not part of my reality anymore. I've embraced the new Mark. I enjoy driving around, not fearing being pulled over by the policeman, not crashing my cars, being a safe driver. I've totally embraced that in my life. And I don't want to go back to being a reckless and out-of-control driver. That's cognitive behavioral therapy at work. It's maturity. It's natural. It's God's way of doing things. But sometimes what you and I have to do is we have to go through that process. We have to take time. I don't have 10 years. If I'm in addiction, I'm destroying my life. I don't have 10 years to clean up my act. I need to start getting clean and sober right away. I'm starting to experience all sorts of pain. And so as a counselor or a therapist, you're going to come alongside of someone and guide them through this process in a condensed, shorter amount of time. And by the way, let me just say this as a disclaimer. The jury is out on this particular type of format. One of the reasons I'm glad that we're doing this, where I'm teaching people this program so that you can help others. But for those of you who might be in here because you're struggling with addictions yourself, can you make progress in one day? I don't know. That's really hurrying up the process. As I go through this program with you and I'm going to show you what I do is when I meet with a client, I meet with them for an hour, and then I send them away with homework because I realize that part of the process for them is to think about what they've learned, to take the homework I've given them and to meditate on that, to do the work over a period of time of memorizing the choice process that we're going to do together here. It takes time to change your mind. If you just try to make it information, I'm going to go to a seminar, boom, I'm going to be all done, then I think we're fooling ourselves. So the limits of a seminar format like this, when it comes to cognitive behavior therapy, I understand there are limitations. But I'm just moving ahead with this and realizing that in many cases, what we're doing here is training up people to be able to come alongside others and take them through this process. But if you are going to do that, you don't do it in one day. You're going to commit to that person. When you walk side by side with an individual, you're going to commit to them. 2 or 3 months of a mind shift change that you're going to help them and coach them through. Okay? So there are a downside to what we're trying to accomplish today. All right, so that's what cognitive behavioral therapy is. It's this process, a systematic process of walking people through systematically. This is how our brain is wired. We need to do this. We do it all the time as we grow through life, and we're taking that process and condensing it down into a quote-unquote program and walking people through and using the way that God has wired our brain to its best advantage to have people to be able to change the way they think that will result in changed behavior and a changed person as they embrace the new you or the new me.